For people who interview potential candidates for high-level positions, what was the worst interview you conducted? Story 1. I asked an engineer, "What do you love about engineering?" And they paused for a long moment, and then told me they didn't love anything about it. I panicked, and tried to save it for them and said, "Oh, what about the team you're on right now?" And they said, "Oh, my team is great, but I don't think I want to be a software engineer anymore. I don't think I like it at all." At this point, the interview was dead, and we had a policy not to end early. So I asked them, "What's something you do love?" And we talked about knitting for 45 minutes. It was really fun. They didn't get the job. Story 2. A friend of mine was interviewing a candidate for a customer-facing managerial position. Public university. Think head of department kind of role. This woman was adamant about being the opposite of a people person, said she prefers to work alone. The position is basically half delegation, and the other half is collaboration, and said her biggest weakness was trying to relate to those who reported to her. She didn't elaborate, and didn't seem to understand that she was giving the literal worst answers possible at every point. The most awkward part was the fact that when no one was hired for the role, they reposted the job listing, and that woman applied again, and they were required by law to interview her again. The candidate was made aware that no one interviewed was deemed a good fit. Her answers did not change. Story 3. I interviewed a guy for a head of marketing position many years ago. This guy shows up to the interview and is immediately smug as hell. We haven't even started yet. He refuses to turn on his camera, instantly remarks how he worked for Facebook, and lets it be known that he's the real deal. I asked him, "What are the channels for video game marketing?" And he responded with, "I don't know, does it matter?" Astonished, we asked him how he would approach marketing different platforms, and he responded, "With lots of money." I asked him if he realized we were an indie company, and he was like, "That doesn't matter." Halfway through the interview, the CEO himself finally begged me to stop the interview. We contacted our recruiting firm and told them he was the single worst candidate we had ever encountered. They dropped him as a client because apparently this wasn't even the first time he had a terrible interview. I still remember his name. He ended up going back to Facebook. Seemed like he tested the market, realized he wasn't shit, and then went back home where he could blend in as a useless nepo baby. Story 4. I interviewed a guy for a higher level management position for the company I worked for. Attire was supposed to be a business professional. He showed up in a Hawaiian shirt, jeans, and flip-flops because he thought this interview was just a formality, and he believed his supposed reputation in the industry just preceded him. I had no idea who he was. When he realized we were actually asking questions, he just said, "Trust me, I'm the guy for the job," over and over and over again. It became a running joke for all of us when we'd get a new assignment. Story 5. Not me, but my mother. Interviewed a guy for their chief safety and security position. They asked why he was leaving his last job after 15 plus years. He responds completely seriously that he was actually forced to resign shortly after he sent in his resume because he neglected a final security check at his facility, which resulted in a fire. They asked for more details and learned that his negligence led to a loss of over $2 million for his former employer. And because no one was hurt, they made a deal that he would resign and forfeit his severance package to boot. When they asked why they should hire him, considering that information, he replied that it was just one mistake, so they shouldn't take it so seriously. Story 6. Not a high-level position, but two of us were interviewing a candidate for a job. He was perfect. Fully qualified, mature, exactly what we were looking for. He was a shoo-in for the job. At the end, I asked him if he had any questions or comments for us. He said he wanted to be honest with us. He was angry at his previous employer and was suing them over a faked injury. The candidate wanted us to know he was perfectly healthy and nothing was actually wrong with him. He felt like it was the right thing to do to tell us. Boy, we dodged a bullet. Story 7. Interviewed a woman for a chief product officer role, probably in her mid-40s, for a large enterprise company. She was so nervous that she was shaking badly, and partway through the interview asked if she could hold my hand to calm herself. I let her, and it worked and she calmed down, but given our CEO was a straight-up psychopath, I decided she would probably not be able to handle him well. Story 8. Not me, but my mom was part of the interview for some high-up position in the company she worked for. She said this one woman came in and didn't seem nervous or anything, and did fine in the interview. Not particularly good, but fine. Then when they walked her out and came back to discuss their notes of her, someone noticed a weird smell. Turns out her chair was soaked with pee. She just pissed all over the chair onto the carpet below, but because of the layout of the room, no one noticed. She was wearing a black dress, so no one noticed when she walked out by looking at her. She could have easily asked to use the bathroom, but didn't. They had to throw out the chair and get the carpet professionally cleaned. She did not get the job. Story 9. Senior engineer role, in person, right before the pandemic. Guy kept steering all his answers to technical questions back to the time he'd spent with the Peace Corps. After the third time, I just let him ramble. When we were done, I offered to toss his empty cup, and he was weirdly protective of it, like insisting it was too much trouble, and I could just show him the kitchen on the way out. Sure, whatever. Guy washes his paper cup before throwing it out and leaves. In our follow-up meeting to discuss the candidate, our director was pissed because the guy wouldn't stay on topic, and if he didn't know any better, he'd think the candidate was drunk. And then it clicked as to why he'd been so odd with the cup. We did not make an offer. Story 10, I was chair of a committee to screen a new library director. The candidate came in and was dismissive of me from the beginning. It was as if she was insulted that a lowly librarian was interviewing her instead of a dean or provost. Then during the interview, she asked a question which I was answering. She interrupted me, told me I wasn't answering her question correctly, and then proceeded to explain my library to me. The faces of the rest of the committee were hilarious to watch. They gave up on poker faces and just let their true opinions show. Several just put their pens down and just went through the motions with the rest of the interview. I'm not sure she was savvy enough to notice. Story 11 was hiring for a role, and someone reached out to me via LinkedIn to let me know they'd applied. Totally fine. It turns out he was the son of a former coworker, which was interesting to know, but not really relevant to the hiring process. I reviewed his resume, but unfortunately, he didn't have the experience needed for the role. His background was in completely different industries. Since I used to work with his mom, I gave him that feedback, and he was totally understanding. His mother, my former co-worker, then reached out to me, pleading her son's case. She even said she'd personally fill in any gaps in his knowledge and coach him through the role, insisting that I give him a chance. Two big problems with this. Having your mom reach out like this makes it seem like you can't stand on your own in the workplace. His mom and I now work for direct competitors. There's proprietary information involved, and she would potentially have access to it. That's a major conflict. Bottom line, don't have your mom reach out for you in a job application. And definitely don't bring her with you. Story 12. I once set up an interview with someone for a lead position at a company I've since left. Right from the start, they sent me a snarky email saying, "If you're going to post a job, at least make sure the people you mention actually work there." I was confused, so I asked them to clarify. They responded, claiming the name of the company's founder-director listed in the ad wasn't accurate, and that no one went by that name in the list of employees on the website. Confused, I double-checked our website, and right at the very top of our Meet the Team page had the name and photo of the company director, which matched the name listed in the ad. I therefore went back to the candidate and confirmed that the name of the director on the job ad was indeed correct, and apologized if they misread this. They responded, completely acknowledging my response, to confirm their interview time. Weird, but okay. Fast forward a few days to the interviews, and we are conducting the initial rounds via Zoom. The candidate from the email tried to join the meeting 45 minutes before their scheduled time while I was interviewing another candidate. So I declined their request to enter, and intended on giving them a call once finished to see if something happened. They needed to meet earlier. Before the other interview even ended, I received a rambling email where they berated me for not letting them in early and threatened to report me. I simply replied, "We don't have anyone by that name working here," and then blocked them. Story 13. I'm a senior engineer at our firm and often sit in on interviews to gauge technical prowess. We had some kid come in fresh out of college, and it was evident he read or was given some advice to come off demanding the "if you know exactly what you want, people will respect you" type of thing. It was almost comical. He came in and said things like, "Look, we all know the back and forth. The bottom line is, I'll help progress this business and take you in new directions." He was also saying things like, "I'll need you to stock Pete's dark roast coffee in the kitchen. I like my lunchtime around 2 p.m. I need vacation time available immediately." Mr. Confidence turned into Mr. Confidently Rejected on the spot. At one point, my boss even asked, "Are you always like this, or are you just nervous?" I never saw a face sink like that so fast. We even gave him pointers to tone it down, or he's going to have a really hard time out there. Story 14. I was interviewing a candidate for a senior role at a tech company. At first, there were no immediate red flags when he came in. He was decently dressed, looked clean and professional. When we sat down to start the conversation, he handed me a pamphlet. You know, like the kind you get at doctor's offices for different disease or medication information. Except this pamphlet had a big picture of his headshot on the front, and he proceeded to walk me through the pamphlet about himself. This includes details of his personal interests, as well as his resume details. I couldn't take him seriously after that, and was trying not to burst into laughter for the entire 45-minute interview. Story 15. I interviewed this candidate for a startup. Every time he didn't know how to answer a question about his previous experience, he'd claim he couldn't because of an NDA. I gave him the benefit of the doubt until he finally admitted that he had put something on his resume just so that he would get calls from recruiters. But this wasn't even the worst part. At the very end, he thanked me for my time and then said, "I hope to work here at X." X was not my company's name. It's not like he mixed us up with some other company, he got it wrong. And I corrected him, and he just casually said, "Oh, that's what you're called?" So it wasn't a genuine slip of the tongue either. We didn't really have a policy for ending an interview early when there's no hope at all, so that was a colossal waste of my precious time. Story 16, IT sysadmin for an MSP. Basically an outsourced IT department for small-medium businesses that don't want to hire a dedicated IT person. MSPs are kind of demanding, more so than your standard IT guy position. Techs can get trouble tickets from any of the dozens, hundreds of clients, all with different server setups and infrastructure. Documentation needs to be on point, and starting off, it can feel like you are drinking from a fire hose as you learn minor inconsistencies between each system and client. I was the lead tech for a smaller MSP at the time, around 2010-ish, so I would conduct the technical part of the interviews. We were looking for either another senior sysadmin or a senior project manager. An older gentleman, mid-50s, came in interviewing for a position. He had been the IT guy for his last company, but that company went under and left him out of a job. The company he worked for never upgraded a single piece of IT infrastructure, unless it broke and there was no replacement. Because of this, he had only worked with Windows 98. It was honestly heartbreaking watching this man realize he had been stuck in a time capsule for the past 20 years. No experience with Active Directory or Exchange, thought Office 365 was just a fad. The dude was making 6 figures at his previous position, and he would be making roughly half that at the place he was interviewing for. I watched a man realize that he was living in a little remote paradise for the past 10 years, and emerged into a post-apocalyptic wasteland by comparison. He walked out of the interview haunted. I hope he found something and managed to retire comfortably. Story 17. For a while I had managerial oversight over our call center. Without giving away too much personal info, we take over 5,000 inbound per day, with between 500 to 2,500 outbound calls performed by our staff depending on season and if anything is broken. Finance related. I'm interviewing someone for a manager role. Not a supervisor, but the person who all of the supervisors would report to. Position needed 5 to 7 years experience, with at least 3 years of call center time, at least 2 years of management or supervising experience, all the good stuff. It's a Zoom interview because this is a couple years ago, but this person is visibly drunk. Slurring words, head drooping, the works. I do the introduction and turn on the recording, and they start off by asking if they'll have to talk to customers because they refuse to talk to customers and they told the last guy that. I mean, yeah, you will probably handle some escalations, which I said. They swear audibly and say something like, okay, fine, but I'll need to negotiate a higher starting. I've never taken calls before. What? A waiter or a bartender clips into their background at one point, meaning that they were doing this interview in public. I ask about it and they say they don't have internet at their home right now. Okay, fine, whatever. And they may need to work out of a coffee shop for the first few months. I say that's not possible because we deal with sensitive information. You need a private location. They then ask me if the company is going to pay for their housing, which I say we can't do. It only went downhill from here. They were probably minutes from face planting and passing out before I ended the call. And because you know this is coming, 3 days after I had HR send out the standard, "Thank you for your interest, but we've decided to go in a different direction," email and call, they accused me of racism, gender discrimination. I sent over the recording of the interview to legal staff with a very big smile on my face. I've been told that the legal staff still shows it to newbies in their department when they need a laugh. Story 18. I was interviewing people for a staff-level software engineering position on my team. For high-level IC positions, you often see a common type of person. Someone who moved into middle management, like a director level, at their previous role, but wants to get back to the technical work. This one guy, from Wisconsin, which is important, applied and had been in management for years. My technical interviews are usually a series of 5 questions that slowly ratchet up in difficulty or complexity as a way of just level setting. You can't really fail. It just tells me where you land in terms of experience and title, should we make an offer. In the first question, which is basically training wheels for anyone who has ever written any code in their lives, the guy just starts saying, oh geez, in his thick Midwest accent. He is also muttering stuff like, "I'm blowing it," quietly under his breath. I think it was a full-on panic attack, which I totally get. He then just refused to do any kind of coding live. Again, this is like, write a function that multiplies 2 integers together in any language you want. As we end the call, he is incredibly contrite and says he will follow up if I send him the exercise via email. I agree, although I know I won't be considering his candidacy, and we part. 2 days later, I got the angriest email from him saying that technical interviews like that are unfair, and we sprang it on him. The tone was so different I thought it was another person. Very odd. Story 19. I interviewed someone for a high-value assets management position and, just starting the interview, my colleague and I noticed that they were not suitable for the role. A bit like that fella who was interviewed live by mistake on the BBC, but without the comedy element. We cut the interview short so as to not waste anyone's time, thanked them for their time, and asked if they had any questions for us. With a straight face, they say, "Yes, what are high-value assets?" Needless to say that they did not get hired, and we're still wondering how they passed the first round of interviews. Story 20. 10 years ago, we were hiring for a CFO. The person came from the third largest civil engineering contractor in the United States. Total package was over $800K. Our office is suit and tie, totally corporate. Presidential and mayor candidates have been in our office, just to give an idea on the type of office it was. Guy walks in for the CFO interview in sandals, flip-flops, shorts, falls asleep at the chair waiting for the interview. Safe to say, he did not get the job. The person was highly recommended. His name is well known in the industry. We couldn't believe it. I met him a few years back, and he fell asleep at a fundraiser.